Could we stand for the national anthem, which will be played for us by a saxophonist, Mr. Damien Lane, who's a student of the University of Guyana. Mr. Lane. Let me say good evening once again, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the University of Guyana. Welcome you all distinguished colleagues to this lecture by distinguished Professor Leonard Ogaro, who is also the director for the University of Guyana Institute for Food and Nutrition Security. We have an audience that's both here in the Education Lecture Theatre at the University of Guyana campus at Turkine and online on Zoom. And among those, I'd like to recognize a number of persons, our Vice Chancellor, 11th Vice Chancellor, but first female Vice Chancellor, Professor Paloma Mohamed Martin, DVC for Academic Engagement. I believe he's joined us online. We have a number of other university officers, members of the university community, of course, our very own distinguished Professor Leonard Ogaro, Dr. Gillian Smith, the resident representative for the FAO in Guyana, Ms. Susan Scott of the Greater Guyana Initiative, ambassadors of various countries represented here, representatives of government agencies, civil society, organizations, private sector. It slipped me to mention, because I'm going at a script, and noticed our former Pro-Chancellor of the University of Guyana, Major General Joseph Singh. Good to see you, good to have you here. Number of persons we have online, and again here, welcome you all. So my name is Calvin Bernard, and I have a simple task, perhaps difficult one depending on the speakers, to guide us through this program. I'm known at the university for a number of things, among which might be my bit of gardening that I've been doing over the last decade or so, with a bit of inheritance from my mom. Most people, however, don't know my history in agriculture. I was never an agriculturist. I noticed the dean is looking at me with a sharp face to go, don't bluff anybody here. But I did grow up in agricultural spaces. From my early days in the backdam of Plaisance, in a yard that either had some bit of livestock or growing corn or cassava or sale or the numerous fruit trees, to the 16 years I spent in the National Agricultural Research Institute compound, growing up there, where we had tons of fruit trees, which we raided when we were not supposed to, or I had the experience of learning about the rice cultivation and the various varieties they were trying out, learning about the neighboring community in Bedford and Triumph, where they had just next door LBI sugar estate. But having that appreciation for the role agriculture played in our lives here in Guyana, and having a sense of the significance of Guyana within our region and beyond. And as I prepared for this event, I kept reminiscing about the early days growing up in the 1990s, 1980s, in those times when we had things like, and some people, if you're not Guyanese, and even some Guyanese don't remember the name Oopsie Boopsie. I don't know if it was from my group, but Cerex, the products that we made out of our agricultural products, agricultural produce here, I know in terms of local hams from GSA, which was right next door, and canned fruits and so on that we enjoyed, or fresh milk from the government livestock farm further down on the back. Agriculture has been significant to us here in Guyana. It's been significant to our lives, and we know that Guyana plays a significant role, and we'll learn a lot more about this. But to get the ball rolling with the remarks, I want to invite my good friend, and he's going to tell you whether or not I faked it. A good friend of mine, Dr. Lawrence Lewis, who is the Dean for the Faculty of Agriculture and Forestry. Dr. Lewis?
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Mr. Chair. All protocols observed. My task this afternoon is to welcome you to this very important and, for me, auspicious occasion in which the distinguished professor will speak to us on how Guyana can emerge as this past statement, we say, the food basket of the Caribbean. And his concept that he will present to us is completely different. But in a small nutshell, the chairman had indicated of his childhood days in agriculture. But for me this afternoon, I wish to give you a brief of what we do in the Faculty of Agriculture and Forestry. And we are in the area of, we have a program in the Master in Agro-Technology and Business, where most of our master students do what we call the technical research to that level that can go to product development. And we have collaborated with the Institute of the UGIRE, which is the Institute of Research and Innovation and Technology, where we are working on bread, well, composite bread. We have worked in the area of developing what we say byproducts using wood waste to reduce the waste in the sawmills around Guyana. We have worked on looking at soils, and that's one of the key areas that this presentation that Professor O'Gara will speak to. Because while Guyana may have a large amount of lands, what we have, they are marginal soils in terms of nutrient and quality. And one of the areas that we are promoting in the faculty in terms of research is the area of biochar as an amendment to aid in enhancing, or in the case we say, ameliorating that soils and the products that grow on them. We've heard what are we doing in terms of the 25 in 2025. We have worked on roots and tubers, in particular sweet potato. Here in that area we have developed 3 what we considered leading accessions that from the faculty. We are working on improving the quality of the growing material, especially in sweet potato. And we have done work in the area of Virex indexing. So this is what we do at the Faculty of Agriculture and Forestry. But I do not wish to take away the thunder of Professor Leonard O'Gara. He will speak on how we can get there. And so, ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome each and every one of you to this occasion, and may the message that will be delivered by our distinguished professor and the founding director of the Institute of Food and Nutrition Security will guide us in a program to how we can deal with the food that we produce in Guyana. Most of you go to our markets and see that the products are there and then they're diminishing over time. How can we work to change that to a product that can be on longer shelf life? And this is what the Institute of Food and Nutrition Security will bring first. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much, Dean Lewis. I want to recognize online we have our registrar, Dr. Graves Andy, and our Chancellor, Professor Green, is also joining us online, Director for Berbice Campus, and our librarian among those online. And I believe here in our audience we also have representatives from the United Nations and from the EU. Sorry, my apologies for not noting that. IDB, sorry, IDB. My apology. As we go on with our program, I have the honor to invite to the microphone our 11th Vice Chancellor, Professor Paloma Mohamed Martin, to give her remarks. Please welcome her.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to recognize in the audience all those people who have already been recognized by our esteemed chair, but also our colleagues from the Chinese Embassy, colleagues from the Cuban Embassy, our colleague from CARICOM, colleagues from IDB, from the UNDP, from FAO, of course, who are going to speak, and several other embassies online. I think Canada, the Canadian Embassy, has somebody here, and several others. Today is a day of, kind of an interesting day, because in 2017, when I was not Vice Chancellor, this institute was conceptualized by the then Vice Chancellor and a Deputy Vice Chancellor who are no longer with the university. Professor Ivor Griffiths and Dr. Barbara Reynolds, who was the Deputy Vice Chancellor for PI at the time. And she had the portfolio for planning. This institute was conceptualized and then launched. All of the administrative arrangements were made. And then a number of things happened in the university and in the country, which I will not rehash. They're all very familiar to us. So what that did was put a 5-year hiatus on the implementation of the Institute for Food and Nutrition Security, which was such a vital and important institute for the university to basically stand up and implement. Of course, one of the critical things that happened was that while the idea was important and we knew that it was imperative for universities, in particular our own university, that is on one of the most arable spaces in the Caribbean region, both in terms of land, but in terms of its riverine characteristics, not only in terms of what we can grow, but what we can fish and what we can, the waterways that and transportation possibilities that our nature, the nature of our land, allows us to have. A country in which many islands in the Caribbean and England can fit into several times. Yet we had not really been able to gather the resources that were necessary to make this a reality. So enter a young lady called Kimberly Brasington, who was no longer in the country, but she was with Exxon at the time. And we talked about it, and then Matt Sharp, who has since moved on. And then the partners, ExxonMobil, CNOOC, and Hess, created this beautiful program which is meant to bring direct impact and resources to NGO and civic communities. And we talked about ways in which that could benefit the university. And a particular pot of money was allocated to the university in 2019, but of course 2020 came and we were not able to realize what we wanted to do. So in 2020, as soon as things got settled down a little bit, we were able to start the program. And of the 5 activities that we had gotten funding for under the program, you would have come in this afternoon and seen our lovely security buildings and the new frontage. That was one that was launched last year. And then we had this one which was for 4 professors of practice or distinguished chairs. I'd like to recognize the work of the new manager of that fund, in fact, probably the first manager of that fund, Susan Scott, who is here. She will speak from GGI, and of course, Emmy, also from GGI, who have been working very closely with us to get this program up and running. It took us a while to find the right person for this position because we don't just get a pot of money and just do what we want. This is a collaborative agreement and sometimes a long discussion between donors ourselves and collaborators who have to agree that this is the right person. We had heard Professor Ogaro many years ago when Professor Griffith was here. He had given a distinguished lecture, and we were all exceedingly impressed with him. And I could not imagine in my wildest dreams that he would be interested in leaving what he was doing and coming to spend 3 years of his life. And I would want to venture in his most productive years to spend that time in this country with UG. But having looked at several other CVs and applicants to the position, it was decided that if he was going to come and if we could actually make a deal with him to come, because these purses are not huge purses, they're not like fabulous money. It's a decent wage, but it is definitely not the money that a professor of that nature would be able to make, certainly if they stayed where they were. And so we talked about it. The Dean of the Faculty of Agriculture and Forestry, Dr. Lewis, was very instrumental in this, so I'd want to thank the faculty as well, because they had to accept and receive the professor, even though for the moment the institute answers to my office. And the reason why it does is that every new institute needs to be nurtured and needs to be carefully monitored, and I kind of do that for the first year or two to ensure that they have what they need so they can set up, and then they go to another office for monitoring. So Professor Ogaro finally made it here last year in October, and we were very, very, very happy that we were able to come to some kind of terms with him as to how we were going to engage him. His job is not going to be easy. It's going to be a very complex job. He enters the space at a very important and critical time, not only in our country, but in the region. And this center is not meant to be set up only for Guyana. I want to make that very clear. Guyana is taking the lead, both politically, socioeconomically, but otherwise, we are the CARICOM head and lead for agriculture in the region. But we also recognize the existential threat to many of our sister islands in the region as they face multiple extreme climatic events such as hurricanes, which continuously, season after season, destroy their livelihoods, destroy their ability to grow anything that is, closely able to feed them and to make them food secure. There are also those who don't suffer from hurricanes but don't really have arable lands. Many of them are volcanic islands, and of course the danger of that is that you don't have lands that can really support large-scale crops. And then of course we have flooding in our own country, but luckily Guyana has this topography that in some cases you can get away from it. But one of the things that we have to recognize, even though we are the greatest economy in the region at the moment, which, based on all the literature, is most likely to achieve food security, we also have our own threats and risks and problems. And of course, a lot of that has to do with the flooding that we experience and where we are in sea level. So when we talk about food security, I don't want people to only think about food, right? Not only about the growing things, but really about the whole ecology, every single thing that is required to ensure that the risks that to our food processes, to our ability, to our transportation, to our ability to take things to market, to our ability to harvest and manufacture and bring things to town, to stop wastage, to teach people how to be responsible about how they eat and what they cook. All of those things. There's so much to this, and this is one of the reasons why we call the Institute for Food Security and Nutrition is part of this. Somebody was saying earlier when we were talking about health, how all of this is about health, and we all came out of a period of COVID in which we were all hyper sensitive to our health, and I hope we don't forget those lessons. They were good lessons to learn and to practice and to apply even beyond the period when we're coming out of COVID. So this is a moment of fulfillment in a certain sense, a long walk to getting the Institute up and running. And Professor Ogaro's work is going to be to set that institute up, to set its agenda up, but also I would imagine he will be in demand in other parts of the country as our policies about food security and food in general need to be actually fleshed out and developed at a high level. He will need more resources than he has. One of the things that we discussed when he was discussing his contract and his terms was that he will need a lot more than he has. He will need support and help. We have not been able to find that yet for him. And the kinds of projects and the ideas that he has are so phenomenal, but not out of reach. It's just that it will take a lot of innovation, people with an ability, a visionary ability to see what he's talking about and how those projects could be pivotal and transformative, not only for our own country, but for the entire region. So I'm not going to say more about his work. He's the one who's the expert on it. But I just want to say that we are delighted he's here. We wish to thank the funders, especially GGI, for their confidence in the program and for the support of it. We want to thank the FAO, of course, for what we believe they might be interested in doing, and IDB also. and all the other agencies here who have begun to talk to the university about, and in fact started to talk to the university a long time ago, actually, about these things. It would be remiss of me if I did not speak a little bit, just one sentence or two, about really the role of the academy in the work of nation building and policy development, because I think that often it is missed that good policies are predicated and built upon good research, and you are much likely to be more efficient and effective and targeted if you have people who are really versed in technically in what they're doing, who are aligned with what is needed and what is wanted. Sometimes the two are not the same, but who can bridge those gaps and who can deliver this in an efficient and effective way. And this is one of the ways in which the academy can support the work that is necessary in all sectors of the country, certainly. The other way in which we can do it is one, I'm a big futurist, and the question of technology and the way in which technology functions and will function in the future is something that I think we can't escape, and we must frontally address in the academy. One of my favorite programs in the entire world is Follow the Food. I don't know if anybody watches this on BBC, but you can find the programs on YouTube. But it's really about all this new technology and the ways in which technology is being implemented now for growing food. And one of the issues that is happening in the world, of course, we know is the depletion of arable land. So, so all these universities are working on all these other ways that you can grow things in the air. We're working, I'm surprised you didn't say that, your hydroponics program, Professor, our own soil labs in Berbice, and our own Institute for Marine Ecology and Economy, which we're about to launch in Berbice in a couple of months, because we're looking at not only life on the sea, we're a sea, we have the Atlantic Ocean, and we never think about it, but also all these rivers in our country and what they mean to food, transportation, livelihoods, and what they mean also to the future of our country in terms of all kinds of security. So there's a lot here to unpack, but it's going to begin today. Well, it's begun already, but it begins in proper today. And I'd like to thank you all for coming. Thank you all for braving the travel up to the university at this hour of the night, because I know the traffic is crazy. And to welcome those who are online, who were not so brave or could not make it, but we welcome you too. And those who are overseas, I know quite a number of people are very interested in this lecture who are overseas. And so thank you for being online. And Professor Ogaro, we've said it privately before, but we're deeply honored to have you, and we're delighted that you're going to be with us for the next 3 years. I want to ask all of you who are here to please, when he comes knocking, to give him an ear. And if you can, give him a handful of something. Thank you very much.
Thank you, VC. I think that remark about the loss of arable land is a critical one in our time. As the university is currently in its 60th year, we're striding towards 60, and we'll be fully 60 in October in terms of our operation. And thanks. As the university moves more and more to fulfill its mandate to the nation and to the world, it requires critical partners. And I think even though young on the scene in Guyana, and I believe in its own existence, the Greater Guyana Initiative has been a very valuable partner with the university in supporting initiatives like these. So I'd like to invite Ms. Susan Scott, who's the Socioeconomic Manager for the Greater Guyana Initiative, to bring her remarks.
Thank you, Chair. All protocols observed. And thank you very much, VC, for your wonderful words always. It's such an honor to be able to work with somebody, work alongside somebody like you. So my name is Susan Scott. I am the Socioeconomic Manager with ExxonMobil here in Guyana. But I'm very pleased to be here today in my role as a representative of the Greater Guyana Initiative. So the Greater Guyana Initiative, or GGI, is a partnership between the Staybrook Block co-ventures, ExxonMobil, Hess, and CNOOC, and we are committed to spending $100 million over 10 years in support of initiatives that drive sustainable socioeconomic development for the Guyanese people. GGI focuses on initiatives that drive sustainable development, build capacity, and support education and training. We're looking at all kinds of different programs, agriculture, health, and so I really enjoyed VC's comments because this particular part of our work with UG is a great marrying of all those areas of focus and interest for us. Our long-standing partnership with the University of Guyana is really a tangible expression of those objectives and has included support for many of the things that VC mentioned, but science and engineering, biodiversity, earth sciences, and really initiatives to enhance the overall environment and experience for students. It's reflective of our commitment to education as a key for economic growth and investment in the future of Guyana. And today, we are very happy to be here to celebrate the Professors of Practice Initiative, of which Professor Ogaro and IFENS is a part. Professors of Practice seeks to bring experienced instructors and researchers with ties to Guyana here to the university and to Guyana, supporting capacity building, development of research, and is part of that overall imperative to expand access to quality education and research for all. Professor Ogaro's work in particular is key to supporting that challenge of food and nutrition security. And like I said, brings together a lot of those key focus areas of priority for us and also for the country as it looks to the future, and the region, definitely. We're very proud to be contributing to this important work by this distinguished professor. ExxonMobil Guyana, Hess, and CNOOC are very proud that our contribution here in Guyana goes far beyond delivering revenues from oil and gas. We will continue our commitment to contribute to the sustainable development of Guyana, both through our local content, our work here, and as well as through initiatives such as the Greater Guyana Initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Scott. A long-standing partner with the University of Guyana is the Food and Agriculture Organization. We've had partnerships that I think in particular has been engaging with the Faculty of Agriculture and Forestry, but also with my home Faculty of Natural Sciences. And so I'd like to invite Dr. Gillian Smith, the resident representative for the FAO in Guyana, to bring her remarks.
Good evening, everyone. Please permit me to adopt the protocols that have already been established. A few things. I don't want to repeat everything that's already been said, and a lot has already been said that I think is extremely important. I maybe just want to highlight three quick things, and one of them is that Guyana is a wonderful place right now. There is a lot going on for the country, and there was a lot going on for the country prior to everything that's happening now. Guyana has been extremely fortunate. There's a lot of food here. I am testament to that. I have eaten quite a lot of food here. But there are a lot of people here who do not have the same access to food. And in a country like this, where there is all of this capacity and ability, we really need to ensure that everyone has access to food. There are a lot of people in the world who don't have access to food, and over the last 3 years, millions of people, even in Latin America and the Caribbean, have slipped into hunger. So there's a big, big task ahead of us. I'm really pleased, Professor Ogaro, that you head an institute that says food and agriculture. Sorry, food and nutrition. I think it's really important because fundamentally the work that needs to be done needs to link those two things very well. It is vital and important that everyone has access to safe, healthy, affordable food. That is one of the bedrocks of development. That is one of the bedrocks of ensuring a development agenda that is going to be sustainable. So that was one thing I wanted to say. The second thing I wanted to say, which links to the first, is that nexus between science and policy. This is really an important thing that I think needs a lot of work, and there is always a great deal of opportunity to ensure that what we know as scientists and technicians actually translates into better lives, better nutrition, better livelihoods for people. Lastly, partnership. None of us can do this alone. I'm very pleased, Prof, that we are going to be able to work together, and we will always look for creative ways and innovative ways to do so. There is not enough money in this world that allows any one set of people to be able to make all of the difference and to solve all of the problems. I am looking forward to hearing Professor Agaro's lecture this afternoon, or this evening. So that's it from me. Looking forward to hearing from you. Please, you have the stage.
Thank you very much, Dr. Smith. There is one bit I thought there as you were speaking that I wanted to disagree with you on. Guyana has always been a wonderful place. But also there's a bit of agreement too, because I too enjoy a lot of the Guyanese food. So we're getting to the point for which we have all gathered, and to introduce our keynote speaker, we invite a friend from those old days. My days, I was a little boy growing up in Nari. I want to invite Mr. Lambert Chester, who is now the Assistant Dean in the Faculty of Agriculture and Forestry, and he will introduce our keynote speaker. Mr. Chester?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. I have a simple but very important task. All right, Mr. Tsuti, because he's coming after me. Yeah, I have a simple but very important task this evening, and that is to introduce to you our keynote speaker. Initially, I thought it would have been a secret, but it has all been exposed already, so I will use his name. Professor Garo, he is a trained geneticist who completed the Bachelor of Science degree in Biology and Chemistry with honors at the University of the West Indies. He further completed his doctoral studies at the same university. Professor Garo has been widely recognized and has been the recipient of numerous fellowships from UNESCO in biotechnology and international fellowships and the Leverhulme Fellowship. In 2009, he was recognized as a Caribbean icon of science by the National Institute for Higher Education, Research, Science, and Technology, which is housed in Trinidad and Tobago, and has also been a member of several high-level international panels on biotechnology policies and research for agencies including the United Nations Environment Program, UWI, University of the West Indies, and the CARICOM, as well as several government panels. Some major appointments that he has had over an illustrious career include Professor of Plant Pathology, United Nations Biosafety Coordinator, Senior International Consultant to the University of the West Indies on Biotechnology or Biosafety, and Director for the Center of Food Security and Entrepreneurship at the Keyville campus of the University of the West Indies. Ladies and gentlemen, please note that Professor Garrow was selected as the Caribbean Laureate for Excellence in Science and Technology in 2012. This award is recognized as the Caribbean's most distinguished award in science and technology. He's also authored and co-authored numerous refereed publications. Numerous does not do justice to the number of publications that are credited to this individual. Ladies and gentlemen, the person of whom I speak was also instrumental in the establishment of the Institute of Food and Nutrition Security at the University of Guyana. And in one of our very first interactions, I remember him saying, to make an impact into any market, the newcomer has to enter at a level higher than those already in the market. And that has stuck since then. Professor Garrow is a native of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and is also an ardent cricket fan. While studying in the United Kingdom, he was one fast bowler. So, as it is, he has moved on from that and is now the inaugural director of the Institute of Food and Nutrition Security at the University of Guyana. So, ladies and gentlemen, I now present the distinguished professor, Professor Leonard Wellington Ogaro.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you very much, the speakers, for your very kind remarks. Now, this is my second public lecture appearance in Guyana. The first one was about 5 years ago, and at that time, I spoke about food security concerns confronting the general CARICOM area and about my work in the field. At that time, I was the founding director of the University of the West Indies Keyville Campus Center for Food Security and Entrepreneurship. Here again, I'm another founding director, this time, of the Institute of Food and Nutrition Security at the University of Guyana. My presence here has meaning well beyond the University of Guyana. I'm here on the invitation of the institution to help Guyana realize its ambition to become a regional and geographical food center, and again, to share my work in the area. As you know, Guyana is regarded as a key potential contributor to food security in CARICOM. Given this expectation, Guyana is called upon to do much of the heavy lifting to enhance food security, and I think it needs help of its own volition. Continuing with my presence here, more specifically, I'm here to share my views on how Guyana can transform itself into this much talked about regional or geographical food center. My talk will cover about 50 minutes, bite-sized portion of the task ahead. In this regard, I will confine myself to two key areas the country has to overhaul to improve prospects of getting there, and give my opinion on how to do it. The how to do it part will include a feature on work already planned at the University of Guyana Institute for Food and Nutrition Security. The plan of the talk is concentrated on two key areas, and I've selected these two key areas to cut across a broad swathe of additional issues I want to bring up. So this lecture is in two parts. First, how Guyana's overarching food center ambition fits into existing well-established structures in which agriculture operates, and what changes may be required. The second, what are the University of Guyana plans and how important are they? The first operational structure referred to above, in which agriculture and related agribusiness are generally situated, addresses two main targets, and they are expressed here in terms of two questions. How relevant are the structures to the current food security targets? And a follow-on question, what are the targets? I will first focus on the broadest of the overarching targets. At the policy level, the high-level targets for CARICOM has already been publicly reported, and they are as follows according to the slide. Securing regional food security by 2030 and reducing the regional food importation bill. With respect to the first target, a recent study has shown that Guyana is relatively food secure, but this can change quickly. At the level of CARICOM island states, perhaps with the exception of the Commonwealth of Dominica, the food security situation is stark. This information is well known, and in the interest of time, I will not get into the details of the starkness. Regarding Target 2, it has been measured in monetary and economic terms for the CARICOM area as a whole. The CARICOM Secretariat has stated that between the years 2018 and 2020, its member countries altogether imported about $13.8 billion worth of food, amounting to 5% of their GDP for that period. I can add further that from my own research that up to 90% of the processed food consumed in the Caribbean is included. The regional plan to cut food import bill by 25% by 2025 is therefore an important call for action. It is not realistic. It is more of an urgent call for action, which is needed. At this point, I want to introduce the first established structure confined in which agriculture operates. Now, this is the pyramid everybody knows. It relates to primary production and the directional flow of profits. It's a simple representation that has evolved with most agricultural production and training platforms. It focuses on two main components of the system: the broad base, where farmers work and work the land to generate primary produce, and the upper tiers, where the base output is taken to the market, and in the process, value added, for example, by processing. In this model or structure, the proverbial concern is that the base is the least rewarded from the wealth generated. This is relevant to Caribbean countries that have been traditionally primary producers. To retain a greater portion of the wealth generated by this pyramid system, there has to be a greater capacity for value addition and greater ownership and participation in the entire supply and value addition chains. This call is not new, but with CARICOM's policy to reduce the food import bill, there's a sense of urgency for action. A good place to start is with value addition for import substitution, which will cut back food imports significantly. I will return to this later with respect to the University of Guyana's planned involvement in this process. Regarding the pyramid structure in which agriculture operates, I want to spend some time on the production base. That is the arable land. Recall I indicated earlier that I will address 2 key issues that must be overhauled for Guyana to get on course to become a viable and sustainable regional food center. This is the first one, the arable land. The arable land is the level that supports the higher tiers in the pyramid structure. In regional discussions on food security, not much attention is paid to the availability of land for farming. So consider the arable land situation in CARICOM countries except Guyana, Suriname, Haiti, and Belize. A review of the agricultural census data over several decades revealed that the combined arable land acreage declined by 52% between the period 1958 and 2012. I have reported extensively on the island states in detail elsewhere, and the loss of arable land, I should add, were for residential development, tourism, and other commercial activities. This land will not be returned to agriculture. It is more financially attractive to convert land from agriculture to construct dwellings, shopping centers, hotels, etc. If agriculture must remain viable, ways must be found to keep the arable land in vibrant farming. This will not happen if arable land holdings are valued far less than land for competing uses mentioned. The situation will have to be overhauled to sustain viable agriculture, particularly in countries or areas with very limited arable land. In the case of Guyana, with respect to land use, 1.54% is classified as cropland, and good to moderate soil supplanting make up 5.8% of the land. I have spoken about the overall land situation facing CARICOM countries elsewhere, and tonight in this lecture, I have formulated a model for your consideration. Regarding the model, the overall suggestion here is to value arable land formally based on a number of expectations in the same way there are desirable production outcomes such as yield and productivity. For convenience, I am suggesting several expectations referred to here as drivers. These drivers are measures that will be caused to impact positively on the value of arable land, specifically for money lending purposes for financing agriculture. These are a few examples of applicable drivers. First, the extent of contribution of farms to food security, the extent of contribution of farms to production for export, the extent to which farms cater for climate change adaptation or mitigation, and the extent to which farms produce or introduce efficient and appropriate new technology to modernize agriculture. Now, many other drivers could be added to address specific desired expectations as needed, for example, to reduce post-harvest waste and disease and so forth. So in other words, these are drivers which can be applied to ramp up the value of agricultural land. Now, the idea is to use the improved value of land as collateral to mobilize investment capital for food production and agriculture in general. And in this case, land tenure issues, which are prevalent problems in CARICOM countries, must be resolved to facilitate collateralization. Only land in viable agriculture will retain its improved collateral value under this plan. This model, of course, will require the following governance systems. First, a system to determine the monetary value of arable land as a natural resource asset, taking the inputs or drivers into account, and a set of approved natural resource evaluators, a system of laws to set up and regulate the system, that is the regulatory system, an administrative system for managing the program, a system for accessing the inputs, a system for financing the program, a system for monitoring and evaluation, a system for monitoring and verification of inputs, a system for risk assessment and risk management, and a system for public education. These systems are required to set up and operate the model proposed. Their specific roles in the model, I think, are generally self-explanatory, and for these reasons, they are summarized here briefly in the interest of time, and I'll just bring them back so that perhaps you can stay with me in the next few minutes. In summary, the laws are required to establish the regime, including all of the other systems mentioned. Current land valuation practices in the Caribbean are not required to take natural resource and environmental benefits into account for pricing. In the context of the model proposed here, these benefits and the contribution of each of the crop production drivers will be taken into account in the evaluation. For this reason, persons trained in the evaluation of environmental benefits derived from farming and the contribution of the crop performance drivers are required. Reference to the need for trained natural resource evaluators in the context of the model addresses this requirement. The approved inputs and relevant information must be readily accessible to farmers for consideration for introduction, and this is the responsibility of the system for accessing inputs. It will be necessary to review the model with respect to achieving its objective over time and to make adjustments as required. This is the function of the monitoring and evaluation system. In addition, there will be a requirement to monitor farms with the objectives of verifying recognized inputs for introduction for land evaluation purposes. This is the role of the system for monitoring and verification of inputs. The general public should be consulted to get its support through the public education program. Another aspect of the public education program will target farmers with respect to the working of the system and the responsibilities of the contracting partners. As there are risks associated with any undertaking, including the plan proposed, and farming in particular, a program of risk assessment and risk management will be required to prevent or minimize the impact of adverse events. The model should be supported by the appropriate crop industry infrastructure, and I'll mention key elements of this infrastructure later in the context of the work of the Institute for Food and Nutrition Security at the University of Guyana. Now, the idea of collateralizing property, including agricultural land, for the purposes of obtaining credit is an integral aspect of money lending trade. It is also common for the value of a collateral to vary based on intrinsic and extrinsic factors recognized by the marketplace. In the context of the model proposed here, the objective is to give greater recognition to several intrinsic factors, namely the inputs or drivers which are intended to address crop production shortcomings and to add value to the asset regarded here as the agricultural land or farm. The specific details for factoring the inputs in valuing agricultural land in this context of the model can be worked out. And in this regard, suffice to say, there are methodologies or approaches available for valuing environmental and natural resource assets, including agricultural land, based on benefits to society in the context of sustainable development. The model has potential economic spin-offs besides those linked to the agricultural sector. Taking into account the large number of arable land holdings in private ownership and their widespread distribution with respect to geography and demography, there is potential for improving and enlarging economic activity and space if the model triggers economic activities in areas not normally associated with agriculture. It is my opinion that arable land as a productive asset and farmers' input are undervalued in monetary terms. Funding for the program, as mentioned before, is required for public and private lending institutions should be provided with incentives to set up an agricultural portfolio tailored to the new approach. It is likely that the incentives will have to be in the form of credit guarantee. The government is the likely guarantor, and it is assumed that citizens of Guyana, through their government, will be prepared to pay a little bit more to secure a wide-ranging benefits, including those associated with production and conservation of the environment and the sustainable use of natural resource. It might be possible to target global funding sources for grants set aside for implementation of multilateral environmental agreements, of which Guyana is a party to, for part of the financing required to implement the proposed model. Notably, there are funds currently available to Guyana for implementing programs for climate change adaptation and mitigation, and for the protection and conservation of the environment and sustainable use of natural resources. The proposed model caters for the implementation of these programs through the drivers pertaining to the protection and conservation of the environment and sustainable use of natural resources and climate change adaptation and mitigation. One advantage of using the financing in this manner described is that funds will not be replenished, as the credit or loans obtained by farmers in the context of the model will be repaid. The model is therefore the basis for sustaining programs on climate change adaptation and mitigation, and production and conservation of the environment and sustainable use of natural resources. In the current practice, the funds referred to are depleted and not replenished at the end of the targeted implementation programs. Finally, the model itself will become an important driver of the low-carbon development strategy enacted by the Guyana government initially in 2006, partly in response to the damaging effects of the great floods of 2006. I will now turn my attention to another structure in which agriculture operates, and this is the one that operates currently in Guyana and the rest of the CARICOM region. And I think this one is familiar to everybody here. And essentially, so, in the farmers is in the center of the structure, and all of the National Extension Service and all of the government supports focus on the farmer, and goods and supplies move in and outwards. So this is essentially the system that operates here. And this is one that has to be overhauled, and I'll explain. Now, in the pre-independence or colonial era, agriculture, research and development in the English-speaking Caribbean was coordinated through the governance system of the British Empire. This system was primarily responsible for the agricultural setup, including its governance and infrastructure the countries inherit and operate up to this day. This system served the function of linking R&D to economic growth and development. Now, it's anyone's guess how relevant this system is currently, given the predicament CARICOM agriculture sector is in. Times are changing, and the infrastructure and governance of the agricultural research and development sector, as illustrated, must be adjusted to take new empirical information and understanding into account. In this regard, the consensus view is that agriculture formulated here as the agricultural R&D sector to keep up with modern times and development must operate as an innovation system to be successful and sustainable. The appropriate infrastructure and governance framework for successful agricultural R&D innovation system for Guyana has not yet come together holistically. In this lecture, an appropriate innovation system to situate the agricultural R&D sector for Guyana is also proposed. Now, the slide there gives you a very densely worded explanation of, or definition of what innovation is. I don't expect you to read it. The point I wanted to emphasize there is the focus on the broad definition of innovation as might be perceived by the different areas highlighted in bold typeset fonts on the slide. Now, I've done this to draw the contrast to a more restricted traditional view, which focuses on science and technology and innovation, which follows a more linear, less interactive path from basic research to economic development. So that's essentially what the previous structure, that's how it's run, a more linear, less interactive pathway. Now, a broader set of interactions is now required to overhaul and establish a more impactful progressive link from innovation to agricultural to economic growth. Now, the question is, what is the basis for this conclusion? The answer is that there has been a significant body of work on why countries differ in their innovative performance. And there is a generic innovation system that I'd like to introduce you to. And this is being well worked out, and it has its groundings in evolutionary economics. And this is the representation of a successful innovation system for the agricultural R&D sector in Guyana. I'll say a little bit more about it. Now, in a successful national innovation system, the entrepreneur is at the center of the concentric circle . Just trying to get the laser. It's on? Oh. Okay. I guess you can see the structure with several circles, concentric circles. And the innermost one is the entrepreneur. So that's where your farmer would be in the earlier one. And essentially, in this particular case, for a successful innovation system, the entrepreneur and business activity at the center, the R&D component is really one section of the circle, and it must interact with several other components, 5 other components: education, bridging technology, research and development. That's the one that needs to interact with all of these other components in your first concentric circle. Now, I should also add that there is a blueprint for this, because even though we take those components in terms of how you break down those components, then, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble with this. So if I take the first component, which is policy, then that could be broken down into other clusters, other subcomponents, for example, national and regional. So it's a blueprint, essentially, of how you move from one component and to break that down into other subcomponents to make sure that you have the entire system in place. So what I'm really doing is just giving you the general outline of the system. Now, with respect to the model again, moving out to the next concentric circle, you'll notice that there's an area called regional level. So there's another set of factors that must be interacted with so that Guyana's agricultural focus can move into the regional space. And then beyond that, you see the global level. Then there's another set of components that must be interacted with for Guyana's agriculture system to move into the global space. So it all has to be planned out and as an innovation system in a very systematic way, and all of these things will fall into place. So, as I said before, the system is already grounded in the necessary economic disciplines, meaning that there's a pathway for the system to move straight into economic development and recognize the benefits associated with those. I also want to just draw your attention briefly to the governance architecture which is being set up for this system. You may not be able to see the details of it, but essentially in terms of the governance architecture, this also comes with the model. In other words, at the parliamentary level, at the level of cabinet, at the level of the ministries, at the level of the research stations, so they're essentially vertical and horizontal levels and drivers and so forth. So the entire package of system is available for how you set up the governance system. Now, I'll just say something about the governance system because it introduces the next aspect of the talk I want to get into. So this is the governance system for a successful national innovation system. It illustrates the roles of the various actors in the innovation system and how the system works. In summary, the governance has vertical and horizontal dimensions. For example, there are 4 key levels that steer the system. Completing the other vertical components. One level directs another level below and receives feedback in return. Now, the horizontal governance mechanisms really deal with coordination and across organizational boundaries on issues of policy, coordination, coherence, given the systemic nature of research and innovation. It also brings a fair amount of synergy, and doing this well requires capabilities that must be the result of intentional and systematic efforts. So it has to be set up in place as a component of Guyana's intention to become this food center. Now, linking agricultural R&D sector to sustainable economic development and growth requires this systems approach. This should begin by bringing together all components or organizations needed to institutionalize a national innovation system for Guyana. Technical and financial assistance will be required to bring each forum into existence. There should be programming planned to convene each forum annually to share information with the view of presenting all assets needed to take potentially viable innovation attributes into entrepreneurial activity. In addition, the forum will perform the function of accessing the capacity of each component to function effectively in the innovation system. Now, there would also be the need for technical and financial support required to build the capacity of each of the components that I've mentioned earlier. The overarching responsibility to set up this innovation system proposed could be given to an agency which is dedicated to the development of entrepreneurship, not only in training, but also as practitioner. And the question is, what are the possible constituent candidates or agencies? Now, in Guyana, there are several government agencies listed there. And this is based on the broad criterion above for selecting the coordination entity. Now, all of these government entities have well-established and proven footprint in areas relevant to national innovation system proposed and are expected to have impact. So that, now in addition, there is another partner, another proposed partner, which is the Institute for Food and Nutrition Security, and its purpose is grounded in the development of entrepreneurship, both in training and practice. Now, the Institute has already carved out its role in National Agricultural Research and Development Innovation System proposed. And in this regard, it has proposed several projects, and I'll just talk to you about one. Now, first, I should also tell you, although you've heard about it from the Vice Chancellor and others, what is the Institute? So it's a specialized section of the University of Guyana, and one part of its existence is to assist Guyana in its transformation to become a geographical food center. And it would do this through several objectives, which would include primary production, research and development, science and technology, innovation, value addition, entrepreneurship, training, and public outreach. And one of the landmark plans is to set up what is referred to as a food science park, which essentially would be the focus to drive the agricultural R&D innovation that we spoke about. I'll just step you through what some of the components of this likely to be, and these would be your take-home points with respect to the park. The first is that so this is a facility which spreads across about 32 acres. And I'll explain that some more. So there's an administrative building, so there's be 2 floors. There'd be a modern conference center and training rooms, and their capacity there. Now, the point here is that if Guyana intends to be a regional or geographical food center, then it must also be the training center at the same time. So that is to say, it would be the regional focus or center to provide training, teaching, research. So in other words, the other countries that it serves will come to Guyana for training, very much in the same way that maybe sometimes Guyanese migrate abroad for training, but in this particular case, this is with respect to building out a food center for the Caribbean. So it's not only just food production, but also the training and all of the other things. The conferencing, so for example, the major agricultural conferences would also migrate here. And the point that I always make to some of my colleagues, if Guyana wants to be a food center of the rank of the UK or any other country, then it has to put in the infrastructure to be that. It can't be less. And this is a move towards putting in those kinds of infrastructure to be that food center. Because being the food center is not just about growing more food, it's all of the infrastructure that comes together to support it. Agro-processing facilities, so these are fairly large ones, 15. I mentioned earlier the significant amounts of processed foods. Now, so these are fairly large agro-processing facilities. So what it means that they'll do the heavy lifting in food processing in Guyana, so they'd more likely function as communal agro-processing units. So in other words, people who cannot afford to build out the infrastructure will have a place where they can come and do their processing, all certified and so forth. So these are facilities that will cater for the whole country and carry the heavy lifting in the agro-processing sector. So there'd be meat curing facilities, so that will be similar function. So there'd be foods standards laboratory, so everything would be done on site and all of the facilities would be there. There would be a research cubicle, so these again large facilities that facilitate research, including people coming in and the sort of training that you will expect from the University of Guyana, and also meeting the demand for training in the other regional countries, just to putting all of that infrastructure to make it all happen. And there are visitor centers, field stations, and so forth. There are some issues here, of course. The economists would ask, is this feasible? So there's some income generating things there, retail shops, a visitor center, so this would be hopefully an interesting place to go to, one of its kind. So visitors can come for fee, of course, and spend the whole day seeing what's going on. So then again, it contributes to agritourism and so forth. So you capture all of those linkages. Retail shops, so things that are done there can be commercially available, either wholesale or retail. So that's the system. There are restaurants and food courts and so forth, and there would be demonstration centers for research and development, catering for smart climate smart agriculture. Then basically the ICT backbone for the entire system. Hopefully it would be there, so that it means that you'll have access to cloud computing and all of the servers. So there, for example, there's a program UG hopes for in the context of the Internet of Things, whereby there could be remote sensing and the data comes back and get analyzed and the result. So all of that facility would be there, and we can make it pleasant for the people there by having adequate number of parking lots, so it's not too difficult to come, and open green spaces so you can relax, and a recreation park. And so at this point, ladies and gentlemen, in closing, let me thank you for coming, and I hope it's been worth your time.
We'll be closing at this point, and to close us off, I'd like to invite our Deputy Vice Chancellor for Academic Engagement, Professor Emanuel Cummings, to give the closing remarks. He is joining us online.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, of this evening proceedings. Let me first of all thank the Vice Chancellor and the Dean of the Faculty of Agriculture, playing impressive roles in having this school, this Institute of Food and Nutrition, established and on the road, and certainly do want to thank Professor O'Gara for a wonderful lecture. I've learned so much outside of what I know about food and nutrition, but certainly the issue of food insecurity is an important one. I wish to remind us that in the old topic about food security, also refers to food safety. Food safety is an integral part of food security. We know there are many challenges with respect to food security, and I think Vice Chancellor in a remark spoke about the integration of other academic units. I want to expand that. There is opportunity for agricultural economics in the Institute, as we understand the whole issue of food security, agriculture and geography in agriculture, climate change, and agriculture, and many other areas. I think there is a lot of scope for this institute in addressing issues of food security. Where and as Professor Ogralo would have mentioned, one of these is education. And certainly as a university, I think there are great opportunities for us to expand on a number of programs, some of which I would have mentioned, that addresses the whole issue of food security and ensure that we can combine the scientific knowledge with agriculture so that we can have available food and food that is safe for our population in the region and the world at large. We just, as we still in the Russian-Ukraine war, and not so long ago, we learned about the shortage of wheat. We're accustomed having wheat coming from Europe, and I've heard about discussions where Guyana might be thinking, and maybe the agriculture scientists, this can be a great opportunity for us to look at how we can cultivate non-traditional products and also to improve in the products which we have, and not forgetting that the effects of climate change and how we can use science to improve on the quality of our agricultural produce. A lot has been said about you pass in front of border market and you see the wastage and the whole issue of food preservation, which certainly can be marketed and can constitute an important economic activity for persons and the country as a whole. I am always disappointed when I go into the supermarket and I see a lot of the nutritional products coming from way and beyond, way outside of the Caribbean, and which I think some of it can be cultivated, packaged right here, which can contribute to the economy and also a form of employment. Only this morning, the head of Go Invest, in his remark, spoke about if one were to invest, we should invest in agriculture. And I can't agree much more, which I think was endorsed by the lecture this evening by Professor Ugaro. I just wanted also to touch a bit more on the aspect of food security, particularly with food safety. I do think there need to be stronger synergy. I know the WHO, FAO have tried as much as possible to integrate these two areas. Food safety is an integral and important aspect, and I would want to see it becoming part of the research agenda of this institute. And this can be achieved through education of our farmers, the use of pesticides and all those chemicals that that are used to enhance crop production, but certainly not the quality. We want safe and quality and food that is safe, but at the same time, enough to satisfy our population. And so I would want to certainly encourage the Food Nutrition Institute to pay attention or to incorporate rather the Institute of Food Safety. It's an area which I have a personal interest, and I think it should be an area of interest to all of us. The issue of food safety. We talk about cancer, for example. Cancer is third leading cause of death in Guyana, and a lot of it is based on what we eat. Also, a lot of it in the treatment of chronic diseases is also based on what we eat. And a lot of it has to do with safe and quality food. And so I see the Institute playing an important role. You know, years ago, we used to have the Caribbean Food and Nutrition Institute that was based in Jamaica, which is considered a powerhouse center, a regional center to address issues of food and nutrition matters. It has been incorporated into CARFA, and I think it has been lost. And so I think there's great opportunity for this institute that's located here in the University of Guyana to take on that role that was left vacant by the Caribbean Food and Nutrition Institute, to address matters of food and nutrition in the region in terms of in trying to formulate policies to address matters of food safety and food availability. I can speak all night in terms of the issue with respect to all the implications with respect to food that is not safe, that is consumed by the population. But I would want to see that as a university, we pay much attention to that aspect of food food safety, because I do think, you know, I think that there is a term we spoke from, I think it's from farm to fork. I think that's one of the terms that is used in the agricultural sector, and to ensure that every level of food production be monitored in such a way so that you can have the right quality. So again, I just wish to thank Professor Garo for an outstanding lecturer at the University of Guyana, for once again, even in its 60th year, do bring to the fore themes, matters that are of public interest. In this particular case, it's not just for Guyana, but also the region. A lot has been said of Guyana being the seat, being the spokesperson for agriculture. And I would wish that we take this opportunity to really represent what quality and efficient agriculture means to us in the Caribbean. The world can benefit from some of the innovations and some of the opportunities which this institute will create for all of us. And so thank you for giving the opportunity where I can give some brief remarks at the end, and to really thank all of those who've been here and who would have contributed, the chairperson, our vice chancellor, Professor Garo, the dean of the faculty of agriculture and forestry, all our representative from ExxonMobil, from FAO, who's always been a strategic partner in fostering agricultural development in the region, and everyone else from the entire university community or students. I think this has been a great discussion. It's the beginning of a great discussion, and I do look forward for much greater opportunities where we can share our knowledge. We can have exchange of matters of thoughts with respect as to how we can really make this institute a successful one. Finally, I wish to say, and this is something which I share in my own estimation and my own vision as to what I think how important food is, and I just want to leave this with you. It's my own concept, which what I've developed over the years based on my research, particularly in the area of nutrition, that always remember that in the management of any chronic disease, 50% of it is based on what we eat. And so that tells a great story as to how important this institute, the role this institute will play in the management of chronic disease in Guyana and the Caribbean as well. I thank you. and I wish you a pleasant evening.